Good afternoon and most welcome to the lecture H807, and we are today recording in this lovely environment. We have a fantastic view over the garden here. Everything is snowed in, and over there you can see the birds looking for seeds in their what can you call it, seed hut. It's a very popular thing in Sweden. You're a foreigner watching this. And actually, as we speak here, snow is falling slowly. So it's a very beautiful setting. And we have learned a lot about the brain and its functioning and the different capabilities that the brain has. And that we have at least 14 capabilities, and some of those capabilities we do not train, or very few of them do we train in Western society. And we do not really understand that the environment is crucial for development. We need to be in certain environments to think and to develop thinking. And for instance, this nature we have around us has been proven to have a positive effect on thinking. According to the old model, everything that was around us didn't matter at all. Thinking was something done in a whole brain. It was not divided, it was whole, and it was more or less like a black box. And we did not, because of this division, learn so much about its functioning, and therefore obviously the potential for expanding knowledge and progressing with our thinking has been very limited. Today I got the idea for the lecture when I entered another lecture talking about India. And in India I made a lot of, what can you say, recognition. I recognized a lot of things, but I also a lot of things that puzzled me. And one thing that really puzzled me was the traffic. The traffic situation is just beyond belief. One thing, they do not follow driving on the left-hand side. They can come from any possible direction whatsoever. And there are loads of cars in the crossings on the streets, and they go in all sorts of angles, directions. For me, it's impossible to enter in such a traffic. It's almost impossible for any Westerner. You need to be a racer driver. And I always wondered, how is it possible they can keep the focus and actually avoid cars they can't even see? They do avoid them before they turn up. And I think it has to do with the divisions we make. And this is why I call the lecture Healing the Divide. We made a divide somewhere in time, and that divide is still lingering on, and that is the one that is sort of hampering our success or progression. It's a hampering going on, and since this divide is so difficult to overcome, I think it's stayed on and actually become stronger. One of the reasons for that I will come to later, but I'm just going to make a short story more about India. I was also amazed about their ability to focus, even if there were loads of sounds everywhere. It was usually traffic sound, it was horns beeping, it was music, people chattering, things falling, and they could focus excellently on whatever was a task. They can listen to the radio and keep a conversation at the same time as driving. Loads more, eating at the same time or so. I think the biggest case of doing things simultaneous was up to 7 or 8 things. Selling, listen to the radio, keeping 2 conversations with 2 different people regarding 2 different subjects, and at the same time reading a book. So they did all that at the same time. Well, that may be also an amazing thing. They read books all over the place. It didn't matter if they were doing something else. And for me, I'm just the opposite. For me, it's everything that comes into my attention is a disturbance for me. It's much less today than it used to be. But even music, if I did something complicated, did disturb me. It took away my attention. And I think that's part of the problem. We do not expand enough. And I realized that the Indians are actually thriving on all the sounds. It doesn't make things worse. It's actually helpful. Because we train the best when there is resistance. We need the resistance to develop. If it's too quiet, too easy to concentrate, we don't develop the skill. Another thing that was quite over the top, it blew my head, they blew loads of different Westerners as well, that was their balance. They had an acute balance. I can't show you anything, but going on 1 foot and going up again, turn around at the same time turning the head in the other direction. That's a thing that's almost impossible for a Westerner. Looking in one direction and turning the head in the other direction, I can't do that. It's just... So that seems that they develop things that helps them divide attention and divide body movement in a way I could not do. Sometimes they likened or compared Westerners to tanks, you know, those army tanks, because an army tank, especially the older models, they couldn't move very flexibly. They just went forward and back. They have a great problem turning the old tanks. That's not a problem today, but it used to be a major problem. And that led me to the idea of the gimbal. Gimbal is a sort of a device one can use to straighten camera. If you want to have a moving camera and you want something to be equalized somehow, you can use a gimbal. And although they are not so expensive today, they have an extraordinary technical thing within them. And this is the very same that we humans have. And that's an equalizing system that is like a triple cross. First you have this, and then you have this. And it goes in all directions. Horizontal, vertical, and diagonal. This is inside our head, one could say, or further in from the ear. First you have the outer ear, then you have the inner ear, and behind that we have these sensory organs. They are actually connected to the hearing. And that's one of the important points here. Hearing and sound are necessary to develop balance. They are not that different actually. They stem from the same organ originally. Hearing and balancing used to be the same thing. It is still in the same place more or less for a good reason. This is a connection. When I listen in, I have noticed, I just started with this for a couple of hours ago, but when I listen in, I hear the very soft sound from the heating system. It's behind me. I actually get a perception of what's behind me. And that helps to balance up the body. And now I hear something I haven't heard since I came here. I hear a clock. I don't know if Kalle hear that clock as well.
Only now when I listen carefully.
It's a small clock and I haven't even seen it. I know it's there because I can hear it. But it's somewhere in my vicinity. And just by hearing it.
Yes, I remember. It was in Paul's room where I sleep. It disturbed me, so I put it in the restroom.
Aha. In the restroom?
Yes.
No, this is, I don't know where it is, but this is closer. This clock is closer. It's to my right. I don't know how it looks. We can look at it later. I don't know how it looks, but I can hear it. And by hearing it, I expand in that direction. Expansion goes with the hearing. And I realize now my old ways are blocking out hearing to be able to put attention, the different 5 types of attention that we can train. I actually put myself into a worse situation because I need the hearing to balance up and to get attention. And all West, I wasn't the only Westerner who was sort of annoyed with the noise in India, but none of the Indians had any problems with it. None. Never heard any complaints about sound. Never. And I think that's a very important pointer. The locomotion is important. Of course, I wouldn't ask you to go into to an Indian street and train your concentration there. That would make the step gigantic. Trust me. You won't even be able to tie your shoelaces while standing on an Indian street. But in the end, that should be the goal. And I'm quite certain the gimbal works best when we take in the hearing as well. And I also realized I can send out what I call a signal. Hearing is active. And once we learn to activate our hearing, we can gain more balance. This also goes in the vicinity of things we discussed earlier. And that has to do with how we think senses are passive in the West. They are not passive. They need to be directed always. And this is this divide I speak about, this divide between mind and matter. And the main reason, I'm almost completely certain of, the main reason why it's so hard to get rid of the division. Every trial at trying to heal it, I'm a member of a society even called Non-Dual Society. They write loads of articles. They have meetings in the US. I never attended the meetings, I cannot. And we are going to have a meeting pretty soon here, and also in for the reason to heal everything. So healing is needed. But I would say the main reason is that the divide cannot be healed until an understanding that the division is arbitrary or random is reached. We need to understand it's completely random. It's not there in a purpose. It doesn't have an explanation. And by trying to heal, like this non-dual society, or as I always try to want or need or explain, guilty as charged. J'accuse, as Émile Zola said. It won't do. It will never work because there is no division to be healed. It cannot be. It's completely arbitrarily. And it's always made in the wrong place. Why? Because it's arbitrary. I feel a stuckness, but my stuckness is not the stuckness of you, Henry, listening, or Ulla-Stina, or Kalle. Mine is my stuckness. We don't share the same place of division. So it's undivided to some certain extent. And that's good news, because people be trying to have to heal the divide for centuries now. I would say centuries or millennia. It's killing off human beings. The division makes it harder to understand other people. And healing divisions cannot be made solely in what we perceive to be mind. This separation, we can't use the separated parts to heal the divide. And therefore, yes, in a way we are going in the language. As I speak, I need to communicate with the ones who's listening. I need to communicate with myself. And therefore, there is a need to use the terms body and mind. But you can never divide in reality. And therefore, in the healing process, I really think that body and mind must go hand in hand. And we cannot allocate thinking to the mind. That's one start. I notice more and more the most advanced thinking actually come from my body. Yes, I was a bit tipped off by this by Lakoff and Johnson. They showed the most complicated abstraction is always from the body, where the simpler things are what we usually call mind-oriented. The body makes the more complex things. And the better body perception you have, the better is your ability to abstract. And in this context with the gimbal and everything, I'd say nobody does abstraction better than Indians. They are amazing when it comes to think about things. Just amazing. And I think it has to do, they never try to establish a divide. They can let their energy flow in all directions. They're not like me, still to this minute. I need to have quiet to focus. They instead opened up space. And whereas I'm now taking in more of what I hear, I directly sense that I come back to this presence, which is mind and body. So we need things not only for distraction, for orienting ourselves. And this shutting off concentration, where you block all the hearing impressions, is something that is actually instigated from the start of this unlikely divide. I would also try to further the thing here, and some people might say, but Hans, now you're venturing into the abstract, the mind-oriented themes. I'm not. I think the division should not be made in like text either. I've been thinking about the thing. I was starting to wanted to, inspired by this chap Kalle showed me the other day. I forgot his name.
Dr. Taylor Marshall.
Dr. Taylor Marshall. It could be recommended. He's on YouTube, I gather. Yeah.
Yes.
Do go and watch him. He's pointing to the effects of divisions. I would say this unassumed division. And it tipped me off a little bit. I was starting the lecture by, I want to write about the church and how it sort of divided itself and said the church is here, the rest is outside the church. Society, people, relation, what we do, how we act almost. It seemed to be an unlawful division there. And there was this site that came up to me, and that site was, I think, from Einstein, actually. I'm not sure. But he said that science without religion is blind. Like he wanted to take in religion as a supplement to science. And that got me thinking, maybe there is a sort of an original lack in science. That this division actually hurts science also. And the need to take in a complement will sort of confirm the divide. And it doesn't really reach into why is there a lack? Why is there a need to take something in? This division seems to continue and progress. And every time we try to heal the wound with a pastilla, as I mentioned the other day, or some additive to the food, vitamins, minerals, it could be good, but there is also a risk of you wanting to add something to something that is already whole. And I'd say quantum mechanics is a healing of science. And that healing haven't reached out, not even to science itself. And therefore, it needs an additive, because maybe the complete science contains what our deepest intentions are, and the deepest intentions of reality. And that could be one of the reasons many of the quantum mechanics said that quantum mechanics is a religious experience. So deep thinking there. And what Planck said, that the world is consciousness, nothing else. Materialism is no longer in science. Whereas we outside of science, and big part of science, try to uphold this division between the material and the mental. That is interesting. It seems that the church is not the only thing that is in need of a complement. Church needs science, that's often spoken about. Science is the stamina, the backbone of reality. I heard many different things. Without science we are doomed, so forth. So they are adding a complement to the divisions that was earlier made, trying to heal. But also science is trying to do that. And here we get a problem. Something I never noted in India. For them it was never a problem to have everything together. They didn't feel the need to make these divisions. And maybe somewhere I realized we should be better off without those divisions, because they take a lot of energy, and actually even if you let loose of the divisions, in the end you can get more focused. This is what I learned with attention. You don't get less focused by taking in hearing. You get more focused. One thing is not excluding another thing. And we learned that by now, the last 100 lectures. Taking in more things actually make it stronger. It's called, in colloquial medicine language, is called synergy effect. But you can also understand that is coming from reality. By taking in more, I take in hearing, all of a sudden I become more attentive, I become more in my body. We started with music to our sessions, something that I really, in my heart, didn't want. but I directly understood it worked better. So weird. It's so contra-intuitive. We don't think in that way. Our bodies, well, I use the term body now. We need to communicate. There is a problem. But we can use body with a crossover or a suratur or something like that. Always remember to use that. But we can sort of balance our system up bodily. And Indians had there in their posture an openness to them. And that openness felt very friendly. It felt immediately open. There was opening up to other people constantly. We are shut down. We don't open our arms to other people. Something that my dear friend John pointed out. Don't do that much in the West. You can find it on the statues of Christ. That is his model, especially that one on top of the sugar cone in Rio de Janeiro. But that is an openness in India. And that openness doesn't mean meekness. We are earlier discussed here in the lecture, maybe the Indians are meek, maybe they are bowing to the bully and such stuff. I noticed those tendencies too, but I did actually never saw that as weakness. I saw that as a strength. To be diplomatic, to be flexible, to not unnecessarily stir things just for the division itself. Why make more fuss than could pay off? Is it to keep the division? I was surprised. I was looking for literature when I was in India. I was sick. I had a very long time recuperating from a very devastating stomach disease. And I was looking for literature. I read all the Dan Brown books, and then I went on to Fleming, and then I went on to Stephen King. I got bored with him because his books are never ending. But then I wanted to learn about the satanic verses. So I went to the bookshop, knocked on the door, and said, "Could you sell me an example of the satanic verses?" And the shopkeeper just looked at me aghast. "No, sir, I cannot. It's outlawed." It's actually outlawed in India. At first I was thinking, that's a sign of meekness. They are bending their backs maybe a little bit too much. But I think I almost directly saw that his posture was strong. There was no meekness about him at all, not anywhere. And I think this is the same as this openness. It makes for strength. This is not a sign of meekness or giving up. Could also be addressed to turning the other cheek. Maybe it's not a sign of weakness. And I was also thinking of that martial art in Japan, Aikido, where you actually let the person hit you. But instead of blocking, you follow the energy and you take it somewhere else. And this is an odd thing. Aikido was actually the martial arts of the samurais, whereas the other one did not originate in Japan, rather in Okinawa. That wasn't a part of Japan by then. Where karate, for instance, is very hard. You block the energy, but that takes energy to block, and then you cannot defend yourself. That's the idea. So they use this Aikido, the samurais, when they're not using the weaponry, or maybe at some instances at the same time. It's very interesting. Doesn't have to do with meekness always. And many Westerns that come to India, they perceive the Indians to be subservient, sycophantic, all those things. But I can give an example directly here. I just answered the phone and I felt the need to concentrate. And it was like stepping into a tunnel or something. All the sounds disappeared, and I had the feeling of losing energy. So I still feel a little bit stiff. It's like focused, concentrated, blocked everything out, and I lost both attention and bodily balance. Remember the gimbal. I think that's a very good model of a balancing system that needs the outside. And this division, I constantly return to, but for every time I return to it, I realize more things that I divide, so to speak. And understanding that they are arbitrary are really helpful, because as long as you start fighting them, like this, like karate, like shingogami, they become more real. And it doesn't really help to add them, as I said about science and the church and the Archbishop Anti-Jacqueline taking science. We have to follow science, she says. That is also a problem, because that is sort of confirming the original lack somehow, and make the division realer, more real. And there's no need for that. Science has healed itself. Quantum mechanics is a healing of science. Because you take in the, what we usually call spiritual, but they're never called spiritual in India. And me trying to explain that we have a specific ideology in the West called materialism, they simply didn't understand what I was talking about. Most Indians did not. It was impossible to transfer that we believed in material substance, because they couldn't make the division. And I realized this division is in the body, my body. That's the only chance of upholding an arbitrary division. And you see there is a certain problematic thing here. You could call it stuckness. And this stuckness, it's not in something that is real in that way. It has specific qualities. And by balancing up, this is a body procedure. I agree. I take in hearing. But how do you really know it's pure bodily? Because writing is supposed to be a bodily activity. But we learn from Barbara Tversky, once more mentioned. We also learn from these different skills that we can learn, that they are learned by the body, but they are perceived by everyone as being mental, mindful, connected to the soul, and not. So you see here, without the surrounding, there wouldn't be thinking at all. And how can you actually make this division? It's unlawful, it's by happenstance, it's pure chance behind it, nothing else. And here comes a cite from David Bourne. The idea that there is a divide in the world is both an illness of the soul and the body. So this can actually make us sick, and I think it does, because our bodies are so different. I'm talking about bodies again. They're visibly different from the Asians, for instance. They're visibly different from people I met upon in Mexico, for instance, or regional people. They move about in a much easier way. Their intention is not inside themselves only. Intention can be everywhere. Sounds like quantum mechanics? Yes. Non-local behavior, it's not non-local, it's actually local in the way the world is constructed. Whereas when we say local, we make that divide once more. So quantum mechanics is healing, and I think this is the way to go about things, not arguing. I mean, arguing in the sense of making argument, criticizing, maybe it's more correct. Criticizing confirms the division. Why would you criticize something if it's not real? You see the problem? Adding the supplement, take in science, take in religion, confirms the original lack once more. The way to go about it is to take in as much as you can. You can't take everything in at once, but that is a progression. Little by little, you take more in. And I always felt myself, when I was in India, I was inskränkt in my thinking. I don't know what that is in English, limit-minded or something, shut-minded. You were among people who often were very flexible in their thinking, open to suggestion. They had easy time go with the flow, whereas I was more like safe or something, like square. And that meant for the bodily situation, moving about in Indian traffic, pedestrian traffic, they are softer. When you hit their shoulders, you don't get a hard shoulder back. Soft and lean. They have the gimbal. Even the most gruesome person who looks like a thug is actually quite soft in India. So they realize where softness is needed and where hardness is needed. And by taking in softness, like being flexible, understanding maybe it's not a good thing to sell the satanic verses, it doesn't mean that they are weak. Could be the opposite. And me taking in more sounds, like the clock is still going on here. I have to have a look at it soon. I forgot to look at it when I went to the phone. I think that will help our mind to expand, because I realize more and more we can take aid from the things we usually say are completely useless, the surrounding area. I always thought that was a useless place outside myself. But creating order, you see, doing things in a certain order. We have the strictness of the yoga, which is a strictness as well. We did learn it with our eyes for a long time before. And every time we do it, we reinforce the strictness. We take use of the surrounding, just like Barbara Tversky, just like you do for expanding your abstract thinking, your intellectualization. You use the surroundings. And it's not a cheat. That's what they do all over the world. And you can progress beyond limits, more or less. Beyond limits, you can do whatever is possible. Even to become a simple Indian peasant is amazing, because they can do things that's just amazing when it comes to the thinking. Recite things, that was just amazing sometimes. How could they learn that by memory? And I started to understand, by expanding, you have so many more tools around you can use. Writing, ordering, strictness, movement, you mention it. We are sort of blocking everything off. We have a cornucopia of possibilities that, just because the divide cannot be healed, stops us from using all those things. And we just began to use a few things, yoga and silence and sound now, that could be expanded even greater. So we don't have to follow these artificial limits. It's a little bit, I walk around in the absolute conviction, I actually have a friend who was that when I was younger, when I was not much younger. He could only walk on the black tiles, in the pavements, when you have black and white tiles. That's an OCD, I think it's called. Obsessive controlled depression, something like that. We do have an OCD when it comes to this thing. That's our OCD. And of course, we all admit, just walking on the black tiles, even he admitted that's nonsense. But this we usually think is serious. We usually think it is a divide, it needs to be healed, or we have to have the divide, or that we need to add something to sort of, it's like a crusting on a cake. If the cake is no good, the whole thing won't be good. It's like the sandwiches I made last night. They became crusty. These ones are not easy to eat, even if I put nice things on top of them. So
I did eat them with honey.
yeah, but there's always a solution. Thank God, Kalle is very inventive. But the better way of fixing the problem is not overheating them, as I did. Thank God we have pizza to supplement our food. And it also blocks the divisions that should be. In the mind, I talked about divisions that we don't do in the West because of this idea. And divisions we need to make in the body as well are extremely important, because otherwise we don't have this flexible way of moving about. So you see, it goes hand in hand. The openness, me listening into my own voice, helps for the balance, and all of a sudden your hearing is improving. So hearing is not something that's cut in stone. It can get better. So eyesight, so perception with your hands, so feeling on your skin, your balance, everything is connected to the gimbal. I mentioned that before. I won't go into this now. I will do that later in 6:08 because we're running out of time. But we have a special system that actually shuts off perception. There's another way of explaining the whole process, and this is what we call the faucet. When we go with our head back and put the head into the spine, we shut everything off. And I think as another way of approaching this rather difficult subject, because when walking on thin ice here, that would be helpful. But I say thank you very much. It was a really big pleasure having you today, and I wish you all the best for the afternoon. Bye bye.
Thank you.